When that mom at the school potluck turned to her friend and said, "That's what happens when your mom's unemployed," I swear my heart stopped. She said it while laughing, like it was some harmless joke. My daughter Sarai heard her. I know she did, because I saw the way her shoulders dropped. She didn't say a word. She just stood there, holding the tray of food she had poured her entire heart into, wrapped in foil. No fancy label, no decorative garnish, just foil. The other moms kept smiling like they didn't hear it, like it was normal to insult a child for how her food looked. One even giggled. I stood there trying to steady my breath, pretending I hadn't heard it either because if I reacted, I'd make it worse. For Sarai, that's what it's like being the mom who doesn't fit in. You learn to stay quiet. Sarai glanced up at me with this look I'll never forget. Not angry, not even sad, just still. And in that stillness, I saw something shifting. She didn't cry, she didn't walk away. She just turned and quietly placed her tray on the table, like it meant something. And it did. That tray held jerk chicken she had seasoned herself, coconut rice with toasted flakes she had hand-pressed, and a mango glaze she'd tested 3 times the night before to get right. She's 12. And while other kids were bringing cupcakes from Costco or dishes their parents ordered from caterers, Sarai had been in our tiny kitchen all afternoon, cooking with care, using my grandmother's recipes, the ones she used to feed us when we didn't have much, but always made it feel like we had everything. That foil, to them, looked cheap. To us, it was a seal, a wrapping that said, "This is made with soul." They didn't know that. All they saw was the outside. Then the doors opened. A man in a black chef's coat walked in. I didn't recognize him at first, but I saw people turn. Phones started coming out. I heard someone whisper, "That's Remy Vargas, the chef from the show, the one with the Michelin star." Suddenly, the air changed. People were fidgeting, smiling, fixing their food displays. Brenda, the mom who made the comment, was practically vibrating next to her tiramisu, brushing off invisible crumbs. Everyone was hoping he'd stop at their dish, but he didn't. He walked right past the sushi platter, right past the rainbow cupcakes and the imported cheese spread. He stopped in front of the foil, and then he smiled. "Who made this?" he asked. And the whole room fell silent. 3 weeks before the potluck, I was laid off. They called it a department restructure, but I knew what it meant. I was the last one hired and the first one out. No warning, no severance, just a box, a handshake, and a goodbye. I remember walking out to my car in the parking lot with that box in my arms, staring at the sky like it might explain something. It didn't. Bills didn't stop coming just because I was stunned. I didn't tell Sarai right away. She's 12, but she carries weight like someone twice her age. She's always been that way. Quiet, observant, tuned in to everything, even when no one thinks she's paying attention. I wanted to shield her from the panic sitting in my chest like a stone. I started driving Uber in the evenings, doing grocery delivery during the day, applying for jobs at night. It felt like drowning in motion. One afternoon, I found her in the kitchen with my grandmother's old recipe book open. Pages were stained and soft from years of use. Sarai was studying the jerk chicken recipe, making notes on a sticky pad. I leaned against the doorframe and asked what she was doing. She looked up and said, "The school's having a diversity potluck. Everyone's supposed to bring food that represents their culture." Her face was calm, but I saw something underneath. Excitement, maybe. Hope. I didn't want to crush it. I said, "That's a beautiful idea. What were you thinking of making?" She tapped the book. "This. Like when Nana used to wrap it in foil and say, 'You gotta trap the flavor or it runs off.' Remember that?" I nodded, but my throat tightened. My grandmother had passed away 2 years earlier. Sarai had only been 10, but she remembered everything Nana did in the kitchen. How she used whole cloves in her rice. How she never measured anything but made it taste the same every time. How she used foil because it kept the heat even and said, "This isn't just food, it's history." Sarai said, "We don't have to spend money, Mom. I can use what we already have." I told her no, not because I didn't believe in her, but because I didn't want her to feel different. I knew how those potlucks went. Pinterest dishes in glass trays, fancy little signs with fonts and flags, moms trying to outdo each other like it was a competition. I didn't want Sarai's heart ending up on a table only to be ignored. She didn't argue. She just said, "Let me try, please. I'll cook it myself." The next few days, she planned every detail. She asked me to pick up a few things with a grocery voucher I'd gotten: Scotch bonnet peppers, thyme, fresh ginger. She cleaned the kitchen without being asked. She washed her hands like a surgeon. She measured spices like they were gold dust. I watched from the side. Part of me wanted to take over, to fix or guide or correct, but I didn't. She was focused in a way I hadn't seen before. She wasn't doing this for attention or approval. She was doing it because it meant something to her. The night before the potluck, she cooked in silence, humming once in a while. She marinated the chicken, roasted the rice with coconut, and stood on her tiptoes to glaze the top with mango puree. She used foil, just like Nana, and wrapped each piece like a treasure. When she was done, she packed it all up, placed it in a reusable bag, and sat down next to me on the couch. She leaned her head on my shoulder and said, "I hope someone eats it." I wanted to promise they would. I wanted to say they'd love it, that she'd be the star, that her food would change minds. But I knew the world didn't always work that way, so I told her the truth. "I'm proud of you, no matter what happens tomorrow." She didn't say anything, just nodded against my shoulder. That was enough. The next morning, we got dressed, packed the food, and headed to the school gym. The place was already crowded when we arrived. Parents with big trays and wide smiles, children in colorful outfits, tables lined the walls with dishes and signs and flags and themes. It was loud and bright and buzzing. We found a small space at the end of the table and set down her foil tray. She smoothed the foil once, then stepped back and folded her hands in front of her. She stood straight, not tall, but strong. And that's when I saw Brenda Malloy across the room, setting down a glass trifle dish and laughing a little too loud. The same Brenda who once sent out an email correcting other moms' grammar, the one who called the potluck a cultural showcase in her newsletter. I could already feel the shift in the room. I took Sarai's hand. "You ready?" She looked up at me, nodded, and said, "Let's feed them." We walked into the gym with our heads high, but everything about the room told me we didn't belong there. The walls were lined with long tables covered in plastic tablecloths, and every single one looked like a magazine spread. Lasagna in glass pans with name cards, Korean bibimbap in color-coordinated bowls, even a sushi tower wrapped in LED lights. Some parents had brought in coolers with dry ice to keep desserts cold. Sarai carried her foil tray like it weighed nothing, but I knew better. It was heavy with hours of work and all the heart she had poured into it. She didn't flinch. She didn't shrink. She found a small space at the far end of the table, carefully set the tray down, and folded her hands in front of her like she was guarding something sacred. A few parents nearby gave polite glances. One mom offered a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Then I saw Brenda. She was across the table arranging slices of tiramisu with gold sprinkles. Of course it wasn't homemade. Brenda Malloy was not the bake-it-yourself type. Everything she brought came from a high-end grocery store with French music playing in the background. She looked up and spotted us. "Oh, you're here," she said too loudly, "and what did you bring?" Before I could answer, she peeked under the foil. Her eyebrows lifted. She turned to the woman beside her and said in that fake whisper voice everyone could hear, "That's what happens when your mom's unemployed." My chest tightened. I looked at Sarai. She froze for a second, then kept her eyes on the tray. She didn't say anything. Her lips pressed together and she stepped back a little, like she was shrinking. I wanted to walk out. I wanted to take that tray and toss it in Brenda's face, but I couldn't do that to Sarai. Not here, not in front of all these people. I leaned down and whispered, "Do you want to go?" She shook her head once. "No," she said, "I want to stay." So we stayed. More people arrived. The buffet line formed, plates in hand, kids and parents moved through the tables, picking and choosing. They walked right past Sarai's tray. Not one person lifted the foil, not one question, nothing. A boy reached for a cupcake beside us, glanced at the foil-wrapped chicken, and kept moving. A dad in a button-down shirt leaned over the sushi like he was studying art, then turned away from Sarai's food like it wasn't even there. Brenda's tiramisu? Gone in 20 minutes. Her son walked around offering bites like a waiter at a wedding. People praised it like it was handcrafted in Milan. I stood behind Sarai and watched her eyes track every rejection. Each time someone passed her tray without stopping, I saw her shoulders fall just a little more. She didn't cry. She didn't complain. But I could see the heartbreak building. Her arms folded, her eyes stayed down. She started to fidget with the corner of the tablecloth. I leaned down again. "You did a beautiful job, baby. They just don't see it." She nodded but didn't speak. Then Brenda walked by again, this time holding a plate stacked with food she hadn't made. She glanced at Sarai's tray and said, "Maybe next year, just stick to dessert. That's easier." I turned to face her, and she smiled like she'd just offered a helpful suggestion. Sarai didn't look up, but I saw her hands clench. She was breathing slowly, in through the nose, out through the mouth. That's how she calms herself when she's trying not to break. I wanted to defend her. I wanted to scream, to tell Brenda exactly who Sarai was, what she had made, and what it meant. But I remembered the look Sarai gave me in the kitchen the night before. Calm, steady, determined. This wasn't my battle. The noise in the gym grew louder. Music started playing from the speakers. Kids danced near the stage. Parents circled the tables, chatting and taking pictures. And Sarai's tray of foil sat untouched, like it didn't belong. And then someone walked in. He wasn't from the school. He didn't look like anyone else in the room. He wore a black chef's coat and carried himself like someone who didn't need to explain why he was there. People turned. Someone whispered his name. Phones came out. Remy Vargas, celebrity chef, Michelin star, host of a food show everyone in that room watched, and he was heading toward the tables. When Chef Remy Vargas walked in, the entire room shifted. I'd only seen him on TV, leaning over simmering pots, tasting food with his eyes closed, like it was sacred. In person, he looked even more serious. Tall, lean, sharp-eyed, no entourage, just presence. People froze mid-conversation. Someone gasped and dropped their phone. Brenda straightened her back like she was in church. One dad elbowed his son and whispered, "That's the chef from Plated Truths." Chef Vargas walked past the entrance like he owned the space. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't waving. He was scanning the tables like he was on a mission. Brenda's table was in his path, so naturally, she perked up. "Chef Vargas," she said with a laugh that was too bright. "I'm Brenda Malloy. This is my tiramisu, made with imported mascarpone." She flipped her blonde hair over her shoulder like it was a secret ingredient. He gave her the smallest nod but didn't stop walking. He moved table by table, lifting lids, taking in smells. He didn't taste anything. He didn't comment. He was quiet, focused, methodical. And then he stopped, right in front of Sarai's tray. He didn't touch it at first, just stood still, breathing in. His brow furrowed slightly like something had surprised him. Then he leaned forward and slowly peeled back the foil. Steam rose up. The scent of jerk spices filled the air. Smoky, sweet, sharp with Scotch bonnet and thyme. He didn't speak right away. He looked around the room. "Who made this?" The gym fell quiet. Conversations paused. Someone turned the music down. Brenda laughed again, awkward this time. "Oh, I think that's just one of the, homemade entries." Chef Vargas didn't look at her. He repeated the question louder. "Who made this?" No one answered. I turned to Sarai, whose eyes were wide. She looked at me like she was trying to decide whether she was allowed to speak. I gave her a small nod. She raised her hand. Chef Vargas walked toward her. People parted like a wave. He crouched slightly so they were eye to eye. "You made this?" he asked. Sarai nodded. "How old are you?" 12, she said softly. He smiled, not a big smile, just the kind that says you've seen something rare. Then he turned back to the tray, tore off a small piece of chicken with his fingers, and tasted it. His eyes closed. People leaned in. I didn't breathe. He stood back up. "This is the most honest food on these tables. Who taught you to cook like that?" "My great-grandmother," Sarai said, "and my mom." "You cook like someone who listens to the food," he said. "That's rare. You ever think about becoming a chef?" She hesitated. Then she said, "Sometimes. I like feeding people." "That's the right reason." He turned to me next. "She has a gift. If you're open to it, I run a youth test kitchen during the summer. She'd have a spot." I felt my throat tighten. I nodded quickly, trying not to cry. He turned back to Sarai. "You made this with foil. That's how my grandmother kept the flavor in, too. Never forget where you learned to cook." Then he stood up and clapped once. Just once. And people followed. A wave of applause filled the gym. Not polite clapping. Real applause. Some people looked embarrassed. Others looked amazed. Sarai didn't move. She was frozen in the middle of it all, blinking like it hadn't hit her yet. Brenda's face was blank. For once, she had nothing to say. Chef Vargas took one more piece of chicken, gave Sarai a nod, and walked out the way he came in. Quiet, confident, done. As soon as the door closed behind him, people swarmed the table. Sarai's tray, which had sat untouched all evening, was suddenly surrounded. Spoons scraped, compliments flew. A girl asked if she could take some home. A teacher came over and said she'd never tasted anything so bold from a student. I crouched beside Sarai. "Are you okay?" She looked at me, eyes shining. They finally saw it. Yes, they did. And I realized then this wasn't just about food. This was about the voice behind it, the hands that made it, the girl who stood in a room full of judgment and didn't flinch. After Chef Vargas walked out, the gym was different. The noise didn't return the same way. People were quieter now, more deliberate. For the first time all evening, the foil tray wasn't being ignored. It was surrounded. Someone had brought over a new set of tongs. Another parent offered their serving spoon. Kids were asking questions. Adults were going back for seconds. A few people took out their phones and started taking pictures, not of themselves, but of the food. Sarai stood still through all of it. She wasn't smiling, not yet. She just watched them eat, watched the ones who had walked past without a glance now pile her food onto their plates. Some of the same kids who had earlier skipped her table were now hovering near it, whispering about how good it smelled. One woman came up to her and said, "I had no idea that was yours. This is incredible. You're really talented." Sarai thanked her politely, then turned back to the tray. Her voice was calm, her posture solid. She didn't gloat. She didn't brag. She didn't even look at Brenda. She didn't need to. Brenda, meanwhile, stood by her empty tiramisu dish, no longer the center of attention. Her friends had drifted off. Her face was stiff, still holding the posture of a smile, but nothing was behind it. She finally turned toward us, maybe to say something, maybe to try to smooth things over, but Sarai had already moved on. A student walked over with a clipboard. "Sarai, the principal wants to speak with you. Do you mind coming to the front?" She hesitated for a second, then followed him. I stayed close but gave her space. She walked past rows of tables, past kids still dancing near the stage, past parents who were now whispering about her instead of over her. When she reached the front, the principal leaned down and shook her hand. "I just wanted to say congratulations," he said. "You represented your culture with heart. This is what the potluck is supposed to be about." She nodded quietly. "Thank you." Then he turned to the crowd and raised his voice. "Before we end the evening, I'd like to recognize a student whose dish made a deep impression, not only on one of the world's most respected chefs, but on all of us here tonight. Sarai Dorsey, thank you for sharing your story and your food." The applause came again, stronger this time, real clapping from parents, kids, staff. Brenda clapped too, slow and mechanical. Sarai didn't bow or wave, she just smiled. It was the kind of smile that says, "I knew I belonged here. You just didn't see it yet." Afterward, people came up to us in waves. A father asked if she offered cooking lessons. A teacher asked if she'd consider writing a recipe for the school blog. Another mom said, "I'm sorry I didn't try your food earlier." I judged too fast. Sarai simply said, "That's okay. I cook for the people who are hungry." I nearly broke down right there. As the gym emptied, we packed up what little was left of her dish. The tray that had sat untouched for so long was nearly clean. Just a few grains of rice, a bone or two. Sarai folded the foil gently, like it was still important. She placed it back in the reusable bag and zipped it shut. Outside, the night was cool. The parking lot buzzed with parents loading cars and kids running in sneakers. Sarai walked beside me, quiet again. I looked over at her and said, "You okay?" She nodded. "Better than okay." Then, after a pause, she added, "When he asked who made it, I was scared to raise my hand. No, but I'm glad I did. So am I." We got in the car, and before I even started the engine, she turned to me. "Can we try Grandma's oxtail stew next? I want to make it right." That's when I realized this wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning of Sarai choosing to be seen, to be heard, not by being loud, but by being true to who she was. And after what happened in that gym, no one would ever underestimate her again. The next morning, Sarai woke up before I did. I walked into the kitchen and found her scribbling something in her notebook, the one she keeps for recipes. She looked up and smiled like she had just solved a puzzle. I poured myself coffee and sat across from her. She turned the notebook toward me. At the top of the page, she had written, "Legacy Meals. First entry, jerk chicken, by Nana." Underneath, she listed each ingredient with care. She even added a note about how long to let the chicken rest before cooking. Something I never taught her. That came from observation, from instinct, from love. I said, "That's beautiful." She said, "I want to make all her dishes. I want to write them down so no one forgets." That's when I knew the potluck wasn't just a win or a lucky moment. It was a turning point in how Sarai saw herself. Before that night, she loved to cook, but it was private. It was a quiet thing, just between us and memory. Now she wanted to share it with the world. The school kept talking about it for days. A photo of Chef Vargas standing next to her dish ended up in the district newsletter. Teachers stopped her in the hallway to ask how she made the mango glaze. One even asked if she could speak to the third graders about Caribbean food for their social studies unit. But none of that changed her. She stayed the same, still quiet, still steady, still choosing her words like ingredients. Only what's needed, nothing extra. Brenda never apologized. Not directly, but she kept her distance after that. At the next PTA meeting, she introduced a motion to give more recognition to student contributions during school events. No one missed the irony. Sarai never mentioned her again. I started to notice how people looked at Sarai differently after that night. Not because she had been validated by a famous chef, but because she had proven what grace under fire looks like. She didn't fight back with words or anger. She let her work speak for itself. And it did. One evening, about a week later, Sarai and I were in the kitchen prepping oxtail stew. She was trimming the meat, focused and confident. I asked her, "What did that night feel like for you?" She paused for a second, then said, "At first, I thought they didn't care because it wasn't fancy. But then I realized they just didn't understand it yet." I said, "And now?" She looked me straight in the eye and said, "Now they do." We finished the stew, wrapped it in foil just like Nana used to, and brought it over to my neighbor, Mrs. Washington, who had just come home from surgery. Sarai knocked on her door and said, "We brought something warm." Mrs. Washington smiled, took a deep breath of the scent, and said, "I haven't smelled this since I was a girl." Later that night, as I tucked Sarai into bed, I sat at the edge of her mattress for a minute. She looked peaceful, content, like she had found her place, not just in school or at the potluck, but in her own story. "I'm proud of you," I said. She mumbled, "For what?" "For being brave in a room that tried to make you small, for staying kind when others weren't, for carrying Nana's legacy without needing anyone's permission." She didn't open her eyes, but she smiled. "Thanks, Mom." As I closed her door, I thought about how often we underestimate children, how often we dismiss foil trays, quiet voices, homemade food without labels. We forget that the loudest message can come from the quietest hand. The truth is, Sarai didn't need the applause. She didn't need validation from a celebrity chef. But what she gained that night wasn't fame. It was faith. In herself, in her roots, in the power of showing up, even when no one's watching. Now, when I look at her, I don't just see my daughter. I see a young woman building something real, one meal at a time. And I know this was just the beginning. So the next time someone laughs at the kid who walks in with a tray wrapped in foil, I hope they remember this story. Because sometimes the foil holds more than food. Sometimes it holds a legacy. Thank you for listening to our story. If this reminded you of a moment where you or someone you love stood tall in the face of judgment, share it in the comments. I read every single one. Your voice matters here. If Sarai's story moved you, if it made you feel something, do me a favor. The video so more people can hear stories like this. Share it with someone who needs the reminder that quiet strength is still strength. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories that cut through the noise and speak to the heart, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell so you don't miss what's next. Because sometimes, all it takes is one brave girl, one homemade meal, and one moment of truth to remind us all. Greatness doesn't need to shout. Thanks for being here. I'll see you in the next one.